Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chitheads podcast. My guest today is Shreena Gandhi. Shreena is a part of the Religious Studies Department at Michigan State University, where she primarily teaches classes on religion and race in the Americas. She is currently finishing up edits on a manuscript, A Cultural History of Yoga in the United States, which looks at the impacts of race, gender, and class on how yoga is practiced and commodified in religious and secular spaces. She has also collaborated with four other scholars of South Asian descent on an article titled Feminist Critical Hindu Studies in Formation. Dr. Gandhi has presented her work nationally and internationally and is committed to intersectional scholarship and meticulous research grounded in facts. So, with that, hello, Shreena. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So it's been a real pleasure exploring your work in preparation for this interview. And so, as we always do at the beginning of this podcast, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the story of your work and what sort of inspired and led you down the path to the work that you do today.
I'm an immigrant from England, and my family is from Uganda. And when I was growing up in New York, my grandfather would come every summer, and him and my grandmother taught Vipassana meditation and worked with S.N. Goenka on, they would just travel all over the world and run these courses.
Mm.
And so, of course, whenever they'd come for the summer, they would make me meditate, make me do yoga, which was not necessarily fun for like an 8 to 12-year-old, And my grandfather and I would take walks every morning, and we would just talk about religion and meditation. And I think he had gone on various spiritual paths. He, was a follower of Sai Baba. He read, just about every guru that was popular during the 20th century. He gifted me all his books. So I have them from Vivekananda to, Yogananda, Chinmaya, he just read everything. And so we would discuss that. And he was always kind of searching. I think he landed on Buddhism because of the caste issue. My grandmother and grandfather had a mixed caste marriage. That's where they landed and spent their life in retirement doing. And so we, growing up, I had a lot of great memories of these conversations with him. And, when it came time for me to go to college, I thought I would go into history, but I just found the religious studies classes more compelling. And I think he had a lot to do with that, and kind of just felt like I was snowballing. I got my BA in religious studies. I got a scholarship to get my master's at Harvard. So I took that and ran with it. And then I got my PhD at the University of Florida. And when it came time to deciding on a dissertation, I was a little bit stuck, to be quite honest. I thought I would do some field work, but I'm kind of awkward and not really good at talking to people who are going up and saying, can we have a conversation about this? As I was struggling, I was getting ready for my exams, and I was driving back to Florida for the academic year, and I stopped in a motel, and I watched, turned on the TV, and it was VH1. They used to have this show called The Fabulous Life of, The Fabulous Life of Britney Spears or J-Lo, and you would see all the fabulous things that they owned and do and da-da-da-da. Well, the episode I landed on was The Fabulous Life of Religion. And so it went through like the fabulousness of the Pope, various churches. And then they brought up yoga. They described yoga as being an ancient Buddhist practice invented by the Buddha. and then they interviewed this woman, white woman, very young, and she was the founder of Yoga Booty Ballet.
No.
Yes. And so she was their expert on yoga. And I just was staring at the TV being like, there is a story here, right? Yep. There's something really interesting going on here. I don't know what it is, but here we go. And then, I wrote my dissertation years ago, like over 10 years ago now. And I kind of struggled with publishing it. then I really started delving into critical race theory, partly through my work at the Arca Center for Social Justice Leadership under the under the tutelage of this woman by the name of Dr. Lisa Brock. And I just started thinking about that in terms of the history that I had researched. And I thought, okay, this history is enriched if I look at it through a critical race theory lens, especially looking at whiteness, white supremacy, and cultural appropriation.
Mm.
And so it's kind of snowballed from there,
Wow.
even to be even bigger, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you reflecting on, feeling like you're not good at having conversations with people. You're doing great. Although I can empathize when I was in grad school and had to do when I had to do oral exams, I was just a total bomb when it came to that. Like having to being put on the spot to defend positions was like particularly intimidating to me. But thank you for sharing that beautiful story, and kind of especially sharing a little bit about that documentary, I guess you could say it is, and really seeing, yeah, such as it is, and then in really seeing in that, yeah, the failure of a kind of proper contextual historical understanding, and then also being interested enough to like wanting to explain how we got to the point where a yoga booty ballet, representative is considered the representative for yoga that has then been, misdescribed as originally a Buddhist practice. Um, so, your work really kind of, at least on the popular level, exploded when you wrote this now quite famous article that was quite celebrated by a lot of people, but then also quite hit a nerve with some others. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to just ask you to talk a little bit about that article. Now it's been several years, of course, and what happened there, and why you think it hit such a nerve for some people.
Right. So I was approached by a dear friend, Lily Wolf, who said, do you want to write something on this? Because we've been talking about cultural appropriation yoga. So I said, sure, why not? And it was just 1,000 words for a little known, blog uh,
Yeah.
for a social justice center. And so we wrote it, published it, I think sometime in the fall of 2017. And nobody really read it. And Lily was upset about that, I remember. But I remember thinking, academics, we just kind of don't get a lot of, you know, attention. And if we do, it's for like bigger academics, more, established and public facing. And then it kind of exploded in February of 2018. I got an email from the College Fix. And then from there, I got an email from Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
And
Tucker
then
Carlson talked about you, didn't he?
Tucker Carlson did an entire segment on just me. He had asked me to be on the show. I I because Michigan State was very supportive, I had help from their communications team, and they just advised that I go on radio silence. And that was really good advice. They said that this would die down because at the same time, Richard Spencer, that white supremacist,
Mm-hmm.
was to come onto campus. And so basically, what the Michigan State Communications Department wanted to do was protect me from him making this an even bigger thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it did get scary. I was featured on a neo Nazi website where they said, we want to go to Michigan State and picket her. And there were some threats that were physical in nature, rape threats,
Oh,
assault threats. And, one person threatened to report me to ICE, even though I'm a US citizen. A lot of people told me to go back to India. And
oh
like
my
my
God.
instinct was to be like, well, I'm not from India. I was born in London. But I did not engage with anyone. And it eventually did die down. But it was traumatic. It was really
Yeah.
difficult. At the time, I was living with my brother and my father, And my brother was, gosh, he must have been 12 years old. And, my dad was in his 60s. It's not an easy thing having to tell your dad that you're receiving all these kind of horrific
Of
threats
course.
and that they know your home address, right? Because that's kind
Mm,
of public through voter rolls and everything. And I mean, parents were super supportive, but they were very, very worried. Everyone was worried, So
yeah.
uh, yeah, I just kind of tried to surf my way out of that, and I've landed on the other side. But some of the reactions, I mean, I got like a lot of right wing reactions about this.
Yeah.
I also got people who you would consider kind of progressive white folks emailing me. I had one woman in particular who said, she practices green yoga in Chicago, but that she would never send her child to Michigan State now because of me, because, I made yoga into this terrible thing. Or people would email me and say, you say yoga is white supremacy. And I don't think that's what the blog post said at all, but you
Yeah.
had these sensational headlines that would say that. I think what Lily and I were trying to say is that, yoga has become popular because of white supremacy culture. And
Mhm.
so pay attention to that. I think we even said in the article, don't stop practicing yoga. And I've
Yeah.
given several talks at this point, and I always emphasize that because if it is helpful to you, if it helps make you healthier and more at peace in this crazy world, do it, right? Use the tools that you have because this world is not easy to navigate. And
Yeah.
it's just become harder in the last year. And I have a feeling it's going to become harder as we move forward. So if yoga is helping you, it's helping you become more flexible, more aware, more at peace, healthier in various ways, use it. I think what Lily and I were just trying to say, and what I feel is not outrageous, is to just, acknowledge that the roots of this practice are in South Asia, right?
Yeah.
And that the history is much longer than the formation of a corporation called Yoga Booty Ballet, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's and what's really striking me now is you've got all these people that are making billions of dollars off of this practice. And then at the same time, right now, you have India in just such peril, you
Yeah.
know? So, what I have been saying to people is, are you thinking about that? Are you thinking
Yeah.
about how you're profiting and creating a livelihood of this practice? You've had the opportunity to because of your social location, because of colonialism, right? Because of capitalism that have all benefited particular parts of the world. And what are you doing to honor that opportunity, right?
Yeah.
To give back, to make it so that this opportunity is equalized, right? Because not
Exactly.
everyone
Yeah.
gets the opportunity to make millions of dollars off of yoga. And I guarantee you that the majority of people in India don't have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of the conversation I had a couple weeks ago with Richard Katz, where he was talking very much in a similar vein that, appropriation isn't just about practicing another practice, it's about practicing another practice, practicing a practice from another tradition, and then not giving back and
Mhm.
not being cognizant of that kind of energetic exchange, which of course in a capitalist society is often based on financial resources.
Yes. And the thing about cultural appropriation as opposed to like cultural exchange is that there's no accountability, right, for one side. And I think accountability and transparency are our pathways to achieving justice,
Mm,
right? So
yeah. So from what I understand you saying, so you think, from your perspective, was the primary misunderstanding of your argument the idea that that it was seen to suggest that people who practice yoga are inherently white supremacists and that they should stop? Is that essentially what the misunderstanding was?
I think that was the misunderstanding. And I think in general, in the United States, perhaps even globally, we have a very kind of shallow understanding of what white supremacy is. I
Yeah.
think when someone says white supremacy, they think, oh, white supremacists. And
Yeah.
as a scholar of critical race studies, an Americanist, what I would say is white supremacy is a lot more than just, you know, attached to a group identity. Right? It
Yeah.
is a system, it's a structure that is upheld by various practices, traditions, economic systems, particularly capitalism, colonialism, our ideas of what the other is. And all of these systems kind of work together to uphold this false idea that white people are superior to all others. Right.
Yeah.
So, what I would say is that the majority of people don't necessarily believe this idea of white superiority, but we all, right, from you to me and everyone in between, we all participate in a system that was built on upholding that idea,
Yeah.
right? We all participate in capitalism, right? We
Yeah.
all, if you're in the United States in some way, unless you're Native American, we have all benefited from settler colonialism, right? We've
Mhm.
all benefited, unless you're African American and you have ancestry in the enslaved South, we've all benefited from enslavement. And without enslavement, you wouldn't have capitalism, and without land seizure, we wouldn't have the United States as it is today, right? The
Mhm.
amount of wealth that was generated from that benefits us, right? So even as a brown woman, I benefit and complicit in some ways in white supremacy culture, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily make me a white supremacist, but it does, again, talking about accountability, it does uh, implore me to be accountable to how my life can negatively sometimes impact the lives of others, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think we have a misunderstanding. The other thing is, I think in general, because of capitalism, we're not told no. Like if we want something, we just have to go on the internet, click buy, and it comes to us, sometimes in quickly in 2 days, right? And capitalism is all built on giving you anything you want if you have the right amount of money. If someone says no to you, no, you can't have this because it belongs to our culture, or you can have this, but there are strings attached, I think people freak out a little bit because we're so individualistic and everything's kind of centered on me. And that has a lot to do with white supremacy culture as well. And so threatening that, saying no, I think created a little bit of a freak out, even though we didn't really say no. Just the idea of a brown woman telling white women no, I think freaked people out.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up the point about the difference between white supremacy as a sort of multivalent system that has a variety of factors, integrating to create and sustain it, versus white supremacists, because it seems like, and tell me if you agree with this, that um, in addition to the individualism that you're saying, perpetuating this idea that everything belongs to me and nothing should stand in my way of acquiring whatever it is that I want, right? The kind of consumerist illusion.
Mhm.
But then it also, in politics, it seems to reinforce the idea that the problem is at the individual level, and that really it's just about like, witch hunting the white supremacists. And if we just kind of find and root out the bad individuals, that will solve the problem. Do you agree with that this is sort of, it seems to me like oftentimes in so-called progressive conversations, or in the most perhaps noisy expressions of progressive politics, that's the focus, is sort of like, finding the bad people and shaming them into a kind of submission to the right discourse, rather than addressing the political structures that actually perpetuate those discourses.
I 100% agree. It's so much easier to point out bad actors and blame problems on them rather than doing a deep dive into our power, right? Into what it is that enables us to live the way we do. And I think one of the scariest things about studying white supremacy is realizing, one, how much power you have, and two, that in order to solve this, you have to give up some power. And I think the majority of people have a hard time addressing that because it's uncomfortable, it's difficult. And we've been taught that racism is something that are individual actions, right? And that our intentions matter more than our actions. And what I tell my students is we have to look at the structures. We cannot look at individual feelings. So I'm really going to ask you, as hard as it is, not to focus on your intentions, right? Let's look at the actions that we take, the structures, the policies, right? And decenter ourselves. But I think you're 100% correct. That's great analysis.
So, in terms of white supremacy as we're defining it, you mention in I believe it was your a talk that I was watching uh, a little while ago now when I was preparing for the interview. You unpack kind of three aspects of it. And I'm wondering if you can just briefly, perhaps, um, uh, define those for us in relation to how they connect with white supremacy. And one is capitalism, one is colonialism, and then the other is war.
Yes, and this comes from a critical race theory scholar, Andrea Smith, who's had to live through her own controversies over her heritage. But I find her article really useful for undergraduates, and because it's short and it's pretty digestible. But basically, she says that there are three pillars that uphold uphold white supremacy. And it's capitalism, which comes out of the practice of enslavement, right? And in order to justify enslavement, you had to create anti-Black racism, right? That these people are less than us, so we have the right to enslave them. And all of that money that we got off of that free labor was the kind of, the gasoline, if you will, for the engine of capitalism, right? Then you have colonialism, and that is rooted in kind of indigenous racism. And in order to justify seizing the land, you had to basically say and we had to convince ourselves that our use of the land was better than their use of the land, right? And that was basically, the foundation of U.S. policy of, tribal removal, and then eventually the reservation policy, right? And if you look at our policy in the 19th and first part of the 20th century, or actually most of the 20th century, regarding Native Americans, it was a policy of genocide. And I think there was the assumption that they would eventually not exist anymore because of that policy. And so colonialism is connected to genocide, is connected to anti-indigenous racism. And then finally, you have the pillar of war. And again, in order to justify going to war, going into a place and saying, you know what, we can teach you how to live better, right? That's been the 20th century policy towards much of Asia, much of South America, right? And our, interference in their elections and the way that they have, created their governments, and all under the guise of, democracy, right? But then out of that, you have the emergence of Orientalism, this idea that there is a fundamental difference between the West and the East, that there is a West and an East, right? Yeah. I think, especially when you're looking at yoga, Orientalism is so important to understand, because we have this kind of romantic, exotic, spiritual understanding of South Asia and thus yoga, and which is, anyone that's been to India know that it's not just all spiritual, right?
Yeah.
And not everyone's meditating all the time. But if you look at Americans like Henry David Thoreau, that's kind of what he thought about India, and that has a legacy, right? Kind of been passed down through the ages. And on top of that, the Indian Tourist Authority definitely plays on that and has like incredible spiritual India adverts. Come to India where you can be at peace. And then you get to India and you land in Bombay or Delhi and you're like, oh gosh, you know, that. So yeah.
And that kind of West versus East, I mean, that always, it becomes, it's especially clear to me, I studied Western philosophy in grad school, and even just the idea, of philosophy is so, it's so westernized, and
Mhm.
the notion of a Western philosophical tradition has become so concretized around a particular canon, of white
Yes.
dudes,
Yes. Yeah.
and that then the very notion of philosophy, which of course, yes, it derives from a quote unquote Western context, but like the idea that like only philosophy existed in this tradition and it's not
Mhm.
found elsewhere, and what they're doing is something like religion or spirituality, is this, is still perpetuated in most academic philosophy departments, and very few, have really incorporated the vast tome of Indian philosophical texts, many of which are not interested in, are not talking about spirituality at all.
Yes.
They amount to, just as rigorous kind of explorations of epistemology and ontology and things that, if Western philosophers would open up their minds a little bit, they would realize, and it's
Yeah.
happening to some degree. And so I guess, that kind of leads us to the last sort of piece of our conversation, which is sort of where you are now, which, we were talking about your article, which focused more on kind of yoga practitioners, popular yoga practitioners. But your recent work, the article Feminist Critical Hindu Studies in Formation, is really written for scholars, it seems, and you
Mhm.
can, refine that summary, if I'm not quite explaining it correctly. But it seems like you're really trying to, you and the other feminists who you worked with, are trying to kind of forge an approach to Hindu studies that would incorporate some of this consideration of the role of white supremacy and white supremacist history in the formation of these academic specialties and categories in the first place. So can you kind of lay out the problem for us, and then we can we can make our way towards what you think the solution is?
Right. So first, let me just mention my fellow feminists, or what we call ourselves, the intellectuals. So I'll mention them. That's Harshita Kamath Manruthi, Sailaja Krishnamurthy, Shanna Sippy, and Tanisha Ramachandran. And we're all in various parts of the United States and Canada. And going through this process with them has just empowered me in so many ways. I just love and adore them. We came together around our dissatisfaction with a panel that was at the American Academy of Religion one year, where the the purpose of the panel was to talk about Hinduism and race in the United States, and everyone on that panel was, I believe, a white man, and a white woman was supposed to do the response to the panelists, but she didn't make it under the last minute. She couldn't. So we kind of organized around that. We had a panel then the next year just talking about how we need to think more deeply about how white supremacy uh, played a role in the creation of not only just the study of religion, but the study of Hinduism. And the other thing that we ended up realizing as we were having more conversations among ourselves and with other people was that this field is very dominated by Brahmins. The way in which we understand what Hinduism is very much through a Brahmin lens. And just like, you know, we need to kind of contend with white supremacy in the study of religion. We also need to contend with the issue of caste or Brahmanical patriarchy in the study of South Asian religions, in particular Hinduism. And that was uh, what our article was in a nutshell about. And really interesting how you brought up the point of, you know, philosophy, right, as being kind of westernized in Europe, and you know, kind of unrooting that from the study of religion is so incredibly important, because we'll have entire sections just dedicated to European philosophers, but nothing dedicated to, let's say, you know, indigenous philosophers or Black philosophy, or the study of philosophy is very much rooted in all these guys were contending with religion, right? So this idea that it's separate is very much kind of, I think, comes out of Orientalism, right? This idea that that's spiritual East, and we're the kind of pragmatic West. As we were kind of teasing out the ways in which white supremacy impacts everything from what is studied to who is giving preference in terms of studying to who is studying it, right? Who's getting the scholarships, who's getting the jobs, etc. We also had to contend with the fact that the five of us were all Savarna women. Even though my grandparents were mixed caste and my parents were mixed caste, and my sister and I experienced snide comments and stuff from other people, it was nothing compared to what it means to be Dalit, right? Because I still have the last name Gandhi. And so I'm, very much privileged with that kind of, and I should say Savarna means with caste, right? And so I benefit from that. And the women that I was talking to, we all benefit from that in some way. Some are Brahmin, some are not, but none of us know the pain of what it means to be discriminated against as a Dalit. And we did some more reading and realized that we have a problem on two fronts, right? And as I'm revising my manuscript too, I'm trying to bring that in, because as much as South Asians are upset about the cultural appropriation of yoga, are we upset about the ways in which we treat Dalit people, not just in South Asia, but here in the United States? This wonderful nonprofit called Equality Labs, which is run by this woman, Thenmuri Soundarajan. And she is amazing. If you can look her up and see her work, do it. She spearheaded with some other colleagues a kind of survey of, caste discrimination in the United States. And they found that Dalit people who live here or immigrants here who have become Americans experience a lot of caste discrimination from Savarna people, from other South Asians. And so just like we bring over our dance traditions and our food traditions, our gender norms, we also bring over our ideas of caste. It just doesn't stop at the border, right? So if we really belong or believe in equality, and we really believe in justice, then we have to examine ourselves as well. And a lot of, just like you have a lot of white fragility around examining white supremacy, you have a lot of, Hindu fragility around examining caste, right? And caste supremacy. So yeah, that this whole journey has been really revelatory for me in terms of, we can always do more, right? We can always examine our privilege in different ways and in more ways. And we are, our accountability is not just limited to, one space.
Yeah. And we don't have to take it so personally. We can engage that process
Mhm.
without, seeing it as a disruption to our very sense of ourselves, or, insofar as we have over identified ourselves with certain things, perhaps it is, good for us and positive for us to be disoriented. But I think that there's this taking of things too personally, back to our question,
Mhm.
the observation about the individualizing focus rather than the institutional systematic focus.
Yeah.
And if people could just recognize that, reflecting on one's privilege is not about like saying you're a bad person,
Yes.
and I think that's hard for people to kind of really, tease out.
Agreed.
Um,
Um,
so this has been lovely. I wanted to ask now about, you're working on this manuscript, and of course, I imagine all the things that we've been discussing are included in that exploration. But is there anything else in terms of that project that you want to share with the listeners about kind of, directions of inquiry that you're taking that would be useful for the listeners to reflect on?
a lot of it is in terms of the content revision of my dissertation, which anyone can gain access to. But what I'm doing to revise it is I'm adding a chapter on white supremacy and how it's important to understand it in order to not only understand yoga, but to understand religion in the US and to understand how the study of religion came to be. So it has multiple uses. It's not just, for one thing. And I think that if you add that to, the many lenses through which you study religion or understand the United States, it just enriches your understanding. And that our focus on white supremacy as a critical race theorist, at least for me, is not because I want to say that the United States is a terrible, terrible place. It's because part of me does believe in the project of the United States, that we
Yeah,
have the opportunity to be better. So
yeah,
why don't we? Right? We have the opportunity um to repair, and so I know there are a lot of people that uh agree, like feel like the project of the United States is inherently flawed. And in many ways I think it is, but I also think that we can use that as an opportunity to rectify past wrongs, to change, to just be better. But I think, again, we're going through this moment where I don't think anyone ever knew what critical race studies was. And all of a sudden it's,
it's
become this
all over the
buzzword in
place.
like the
Yeah.
last year. And now you have bills being passed saying you can't teach this. And I'm just like, where did this come from?
There's bills being passed that you can't teach it? Where? Like
Yes.
in
I want to say Idaho. Don't quote me on this, but there's a few in like various state houses.
they're trying to ban the study of critical race studies. Wow.
Yes.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you mentioning this, your kind of affirmative vision of the project of the United States, because I actually think that, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, that in the wider kind of political battle within the United States, I think on the right, there's a misunderstanding that, people on the left, progressives, hate the United States. And they're obviously very patriotic. Obviously, their patriotism is rooted in white supremacy in various ways, as it's been, we've clearly seen over and over again. But it's, the critiques of the United States, I think for many progressives are, like you say, it's because it's it's um it's an idealistic vision of possibility that
Yeah.
really undergirds that. It's not about tearing and destroying things. It's about building something more beautiful and better, like you were saying.
Yes, and I have, my inspiration from someone who was, very much, um, a problematic figure, Thomas Jefferson, but he did say to dissent is to be patriotic, right?
Yeah.
And, so I remember reading that when I was younger, much, 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 much younger, and thinking, I really kinda like that
Hmm.
because, if you can't be critical of yourself and, see your flaws, then you're kind of living in la la land. And I do think
Hmm.
that a lot of Americans right now are kind of in la la land. Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother conversation. The kind of delusional, conspiratorial mindsets that people have succumbed to. It's quite upsetting and frightening in various ways. That's an interesting note to end on, but we will we'll leave that conversation for next time. Shreena, it's been such a delight talking with you.
Thank
Shreena,
you, Joe.
once again, is a part of the Religious Studies Department at Michigan State. She has also recently completed an article with a number of other feminist thinkers, Feminist Critical Hindu Studies in Formation. I believe it's possible to find that article online. Is that true, Shreena?
Yes, you can find it through Religion Compass. Yeah,
Religion Compass.
and
Okay.
I don't know who the publisher is, but it's pretty easy to find.
Okay. All right. Feminist Critical Hindu Studies in Formation. And then the title of your forthcoming manuscript is A Cultural History of Yoga in the United States.
It's either going to be that or um, something, we're kind of playing with the title right now, but yoga and cultural appropriation or yoga and whiteness, so we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Do you have a general date for when that will be published?
I'm hoping sometime next year. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
All right.
We're
So yeah. So right now we're in May of 2021. So depending on when you're listening to this, look for that book coming out in a bookstore near you.
Yeah.
All right, Srina. How can folks find you in if they want to get in touch? Do you have a website that people could reach out to?
I do not have a website yet. I'm working on that, but I'm on Twitter at Shreena Nikita. You can Google me and you can find my page at the MSU website, and you can contact me there.
All right, excellent. I have been speaking with Shreena Gandhi. Shreena, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.